transforming worlds to a better wonder to behold. No poverty, zero hunger for the elderly or younger. Good health and well-being, good education, empowering women to become sensation. Clean water, sanitation is a right of every nation. Economic growth inclusive and sustained through industry, innovation, and purely dedication. Yeah, infrastructure be gain. Reduce inequality for sure. Make human settlements secure. Take urgent actions to combat climate change. Conserve life below water and land. Ensure we do not estrange. Justice for all, a peaceful and empathetic nations. Let us all partner to achieve these goals and provide much needed salvation. Each one teach 10, no compensation. Each one teach 10, no compensation.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining. Good morning, good evening, namaste, hola, bonjour, geremed, terve, and marabin. This is Namya Joshi, your host for the day. Welcome to episode 96 of the podcast Each One Teach 10, an amazing world of STEM, an inspiring venture where we'll be discussing that STEM is part of every day for every kid. We all will learn together how to build a STEM culture. Well, for today, my guest is Al Kingsley, a renowned figure in the world of EdTech with over 30 years of experience. Al wears many hats, from being the CEO of NetSupport to serving as the chair of multi academy trusts and contributing to numerous education initiatives. He's an advocate for digital strategy in education, IT asset management, and improving governance in schools. It's my absolute honor to have you here today, Al. So, how are you doing today?
I am doing very well, and thank you very much. It is lovely to be here. I think before you ask me questions, I should just do a quick shout out and big respect to your podcast. The amazing episodes you've done over the last 4 years, just huge respect to you. So I'm very honored to be asked to come and join one of the conversations.
Thank you so much. And I'm so happy and honored to have you here in the episode Odyssey, which is leading to 100th episode of the podcast, which again will be a beginning in and out of itself. So thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
Amazing. So before we go to the question, we would love to know more about you and the work that you do.
Goodness. I do lots of different things. I guess that's because I've very much embraced the lifelong learner mindset. You introduced a few bits for me. I mean, I have 30 plus years as an EdTech CEO, creating technology and solutions to hopefully help within education. At the same time, as you highlighted, I'm chair of a multi-academy trust, an infant school. I've been chair of specialist and alternative provision for young people that struggle in mainstream education. I sit on the Department for Education's advisory board for the East of England, supporting the growth of our multi-academy trusts across the region. And then when I'm back wearing my technology hat, I chair the BESA, the British Education Suppliers Association EdTech group. So for me, it's a real fusion between technology and education, every age and every stage. And the more I can shine a light and shout about amazing things people are doing around the world, that's what I try and do.
Indeed, that justifies you wear many hats, technology, education, along with AI. Absolutely. So, I would love to ask you, what inspired your journey into EdTech industry, and how has your leadership style evolved as the CEO of NetSupport?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I suppose the hardest one is what inspired me at the beginning, because I've reached an age where I can't always remember what I was thinking at the beginning. But I've already said and alluded to it, a lifelong learner. So education's always been in my mind. I think, like everybody, having children focuses your attention on the power and the value of education and equity to an equivalent education. My children are all grown up now. My eldest daughter is nearly 30, And so as soon as we were living in America briefly, I wanted to establish what we were doing with our technology in Atlanta in the USA. This is back in the late 90s, but had the privilege of spending 2 years, 2.5 years, flying around America, working with school districts, both in the US and in Canada. And when we came back, my daughter had just started school, and we moved to an area that was new. It was being built, new houses, and as a result, new schools. And I've always been of the view that if you want to help improve something, don't moan about it, roll your sleeves up and get involved. So I got involved at the early stages supporting our local schools. And that grew to chairing the regional schools group and then working with the Department for Education. And the two are symbiotic, because the more you work in schools, the more you work with people and see the pressures in schools. If you have the ability and you have the mechanism with a technology company to look at ways to mitigate and solve those problems, they become quite symbiotic. And so for me, the two have become intertwined, that I'm always learning. I'm trying to support schools across our region and internationally. But at the same time, I've always got an eye out for, is there a better way we could do something? And I think that's really, really important. You asked me about my leadership style. I always think sometimes asking somebody about their own leadership style, you're better off asking people who work with them. One thing I've learned, absolutely, which I think is really important, that in the early part of my career, I was always keen to be the first to talk in a meeting, let everybody know my ideas and how amazing I thought I was and how well informed I was. And as I've got older, I've definitely learned to listen more, to actually hear what others have got to say, and then share my perspectives and ideas at the end. And I think that comes down to a philosophy of, I've seen it time and time again, people who recruit amazing people and then tell them what to do. And I'm a firm believer, as I've got older and my interests are more diverse now, recruit amazing people and ask them what to do. Empower them to be the ones that are making the suggestions. So my strategy, I make no way of hiding it, is always employ really, really good people that are better than you are at each of the different tasks you want to do, and try your best to have the confidence to empower them to do what you want them to do.
That is a really good takeaway. That recruit amazing people who tell you what can be done. I mean, I would agree with you, because when we are all into a discussion group of youngsters, we all have the tendency that I want to share my ideas first, and to give out the idea, and then others can start building upon it. But listening to you also reminds me of the fact that listening is just as important as speaking or giving out an idea, so that you can value other person's opinion. And in some way or the other, it does help to shape your opinion as well. You may get to rephrase your ideas, or get better ideas when you share your thoughts with people. And
I
of
think it's a
course,
real skill. It's a real skill learning to
yeah,
listen. But you can ask the question, which is, if you know the answer and you plan to say it first, why have a meeting? Why not just send everybody an email with the answer? If you're bringing
absolutely.
people together, you may as well hear what they have to add to the mix. And actually, it's better to listen and learn first, because then you can hopefully just provide some guidance. The ideal model, and I've seen other companies often talk about it. People often talk about the Amazon Jeff Bezos model, which is, don't come to me with a problem, come to me with 3 solutions, and we can work back the other way. That sense of always really thinking about those really important listening skills. And we talk about them, but actually it is really, I think it's a harder skill to acquire.
True. Like you said, you've always been a lifelong learner, and you believe in the power and value of education. And especially for children, to inspire them, I think they can learn all these skills like listening, speaking, and of course, being a lifelong learner. And like you said, after spending 2.5 years working closely with schools across USA, you were inspired to get involved and support schools in a meaningful way. And your leadership style has evolved to focus on understanding the pressure that educators and students may face. And I think you've been able to ensure that learning and the support remains at the heart of everything that you can do for the people around you. And that is really, really inspirational.
Thank you. I think it's also nice to, having spent years in America and then spent the last 20 years working with UK schools, but also working heavily in the Middle East, When you first look at within situations in schools, they all seem very similar, but they're actually quite nuanced. Different countries have different challenges. So again, I think that there's an old rule that I used to say, which is you're born with 2 eyes, 2 ears, and 1 mouth. Use them in appropriate proportions. And I think that's very much the mindset of actually observe, listen, and then shape insights at the end. And that's always a kind of a rule that served me well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. Right. So, my next question for you is, with the rise of AI and digital tools, what do you see as the future of classroom technology in fostering student engagement and teacher support?
Well, some people would question whether my name is AI Kingsley or Al Kingsley. It's very convenient being so close. You know, the first thing I'd say is anybody who says they're an expert on AI needs to just pause, because there aren't really any experts when it comes to crystal ball gazing, look into the future of what we might have fully within the role of AI and technology. But we have seen with every introduction of new technology, there is a curve where everybody gets very, very excited with all the opportunities. And then we start to get really, really concerned about how that change is going to be implemented, often get quite disillusioned. And then we come back up again and find a middle point where we can look at evidence-informed ways. There, without a doubt, AI does pose some huge potential. But at the same time, it's sometimes overhyped, and there's also risks, as there is with any adoption of technology. In some regards, when we look at some of the learning platforms, particularly the personalized learning platforms, we follow that story of, in some regards, the teacher moves from the sage on the stage to the guide on the side. We can actually look at it being complementary to the teaching process. I also think that we have to remember that what we do in school is the precursor to arriving in the workplace. And the workplace and the adoption of technology and skills means that there is much greater pressure on changing the weighting between the acquisition of knowledge and the acquisition of skills, those soft skills that often now are referred to as power skills, the things that an employer will ask you at interview. They want to know about your creativity and your critical thinking and your communication skills and all sorts of things. And so what we need to do is find that balance. There are some amazing personalized learning platforms that use typically non-generative AI, looking at data, identifying where a child can be stretched in their knowledge or take them back a few stages to support foundational knowledge. And many years ago, somebody who's well known in education, Benjamin Bloom, famous for Bloom's taxonomy, came up with the Bloom's 2 sigma problem. Now, this problem he identified was fundamentally that a child who was tutored one-to-one would achieve 2 sigma deviations greater in outcomes than a child taught in a class of 30. Now, subsequently, that's been debated as a genuine bit of research, because he only had 2 or 3 students on his trial, so not a very good set. But actually, for the first time, it makes sense with the role of personalized learning tools and artificial intelligence that there is, within the right confines, the opportunity to provide much more support as a personalized support for learners outside of the classroom, to support in their development, their homework, their stretch and challenge. And so I think there is an opportunity to close the gap in terms of children having always access to some support and nurture. Nurture's the harder one, because the truth is, I've always believed when it comes to technology, none of it is about replacing an educator. It's about freeing up time so the educator has more to do with that most important thing, the one-to-one human interaction that happens with learners. Never more than now. Now, as you'll know, around the world, we see young people with so many challenges, socially, emotionally, their mental health, access to opportunities, need of support, that we want to maximize the human value that a teacher can have in supporting our learners on their journey. So I hope and I see AI as becoming but another tool in the toolkit. But I also think it has the potential, perhaps most importantly on our pressures right now, to be about supporting teachers with their workload, which is really important for recruitment and retention of teachers, which is a big problem around the world. The workload, the expectations on teachers is ever growing. And so if we can look at tools that can help mitigate that, that has to be a really good start. And then, of course, when we look at AI from a learner's perspective, it poses some fresh questions in education. How do we change the way we assess understanding? Because if we think a child can just go home and generate an answer, we need to think of different ways to challenge their understanding. And that perhaps is why there's been a really big uptake and more focus on things like project-based learning, where actually we can weave AI tools into the conversation, find out and research, but then develop your own personal insights, for example. So I think there are opportunities where we're seeing that transformation in the role of AI, but it's the early stages. And the one term I'm sure you've seen with many guests over the last few years that always resonates when it comes to technology and education is we always have to ultimately aim for evidence-informed EdTech. We're always looking to say, it's no good saying this will promise us all these amazing things. How do we measure impact? And the one thing that I see has changed is up until very recently, our measure of impact has always been, has students achieved higher attainment or progress academically as a result of whatever initiative we've introduced? And for the first time, we need to, and we are starting to say, we need to broaden the measures of impact. We need to say, actually, it's not just about whether a child achieved higher grades, but what about their mental health and well-being? What about reducing workload? What about retaining staff? What about closing the feedback loop? There are lots of other things that are also just as valuable in terms of nurturing the whole child and maintaining a healthy, sustainable ecosystem for education. So I think that's some of the things on the list.
Indeed, like that's what we talk about holistic development. It just doesn't always have to be education, but it also has to be, our mental health, our well-being, that we're physically and mentally fit. And I really like the way you talked about, the way it is able to support both teachers and students. And especially for us, like I can relate to that because of course we won't totally be dependent upon AI to get our homework done, because that's not just going to help us at all in the future, because it has to be always working smart and not hard. That can help us to give the idea, or give us the framework, but then we are the ones who have to build upon that idea and use our own creativity. And like you said, the unpredictable nature of AI when it comes to its implementation in the classroom. And there is always, like you said, an initial excitement that this is a new AI tool that has come up, but then also it is followed by additional stress that, okay, how do we implement it now? And would it cause any, overhype or any risks? But then again, I agree to the point that teachers will always remain irreplaceable, because AI in a way is just going to help support them so that their workload can be reduced, and it's going to play a complementary role in balancing the demand for both knowledge and skills. That we have learned the knowledge, but then we will also know how to apply that practically in the future. And I think in this way, AI can, offer personalized learning and support beyond the classroom. And it's, of course, going to help us to enhance and not replace the human touch in education.
As long as we keep the equity there. And we also
Yeah.
have to remember that for those of us old enough, we had the same discussion when calculators were introduced into the classroom. Would it stop us learning our mathematics skills? And in a funny way, we didn't have quite the same fuss when we suddenly had access to a search engine. Nobody said when we have access to a search engine that will allow a child to cheat, because the child still had to write something down. And so that transition is that AI writes something down for them. But actually, many of the questions we rightly talk about with AI now, bias, whether the information quality is valid, looking for that fake information, all of those conversations exist when you type in a request in a search engine. Algorithmically, you might not get the right answer first. You might get the one that's got the right keywords or is sponsoring itself or has the most number of visits. And so all of these strands are surely our solution is always to empower both staff and young people to have their own digital skills, to check the authenticity, to validate information, to critically think about what is generated. What is output from AI should never be taken as a stamp and it's perfect. It should always be the starting point for us to build upon.
Absolutely. I totally resonate with your thoughts. So, how do you see AI transforming education in the coming years? Because, like you said, it's not predictable, but what do you think about it? And Are there specific areas where it will have the most impact?
I think the honest answer is we're starting to see pockets of impact, but there's always this flow in education. And I think probably the most important thing I see right now, working across many, many school groups here in the UK, is stress. Is that actually many schools are worried about how they're going to free up sufficient time to build professional development for staff, to build their confidence in using tools purposefully and effectively, and to build their confidence so that they can then empower their learners to use it where appropriate in the classroom. Some places we're starting to see some really good pockets of good practice around the use of AI, and it's evolving. We're seeing some educator-led EdTech companies that are creating specific tools to provide resources and output, both for staff and separately for senior leaders. And we could say in simplistic terms, they are behind the scenes creating very extensive prompts. They're doing the prompt engineering for you to get the right output. But what's really important is controlling that language model in terms of how much data, what resources relevant to a school they're actually searching on when they're actually using their AI tool, to make sure it's refined and specific to a school. I think we absolutely have to accept this is something that is not reversible. We are going to see AI being something that will both reduce workload over time, but we'll also need to weed out probably 75% of the tools that really aren't very good quality. And I think we'll start to see more and more education-specific solutions coming to the fore that have very restrictive and very focused data sets appropriate for education. And probably the biggest one, to be honest, is that I think the accessibility of information, it started a few years ago when we could say, hey Siri, hey Alexa, and now we have it with our ChatGPT or our Claude or our Perplexity, Gemini. All brands will share as equal. It will ultimately change the way that we undertake assessment. That's for me, is the most important one. We will have to think and refine, and good educators already can do that. You know, for many, you'll say, how do you know your child didn't write that? Well, I know the child, and that's probably the most important answer. But it will change. But I actually think this is part of a bigger conversation around the changing demands of the workplace. And I think within the context of the changing demands for the workplace, we are going to see reform of our curriculum. We are going to see the need to acquire different skills being more important as part of that conversation. I often reference the work undertaken over the last few years by the OECD. I co-chaired a work stream with the OECD and the Foundation for Educational Development here in the UK, working on their program for human flourishing. And that is, in effect, a revision of what we currently see. So we see the PISA rankings around the world, and we can say which countries are performing highest on the international league tables based on that snapshot of 15-year-olds around the world. And what the OECD have been looking at is saying, actually, if we want to look at a successful education system, are we capturing one that is about how much knowledge we can acquire alongside some skills to answer those questions? Or should we be measuring school systems that promote human flourishing, whether that's an appreciation and joy of the arts, looking at picture and having a sense of awe and wonder is one of the terms they use, but that broader sense of measuring the whole child. And I think AI has proven to be a very useful catalyst for us to pause and reflect in the whole about our education offer. And that, alongside the pressure we currently see with our current cohort of learners, and quite a proportion struggling with learning in a mainstream setting, challenges with attendance in our schools, means that we start to look and say, well, is there a different way we could offer education? And of course, any different way typically will require technology to fill the gaps, which is why we're starting to see more online schools, specialist provision, using these new technologies and tools as part of the learning offer.
Indeed, I really liked how you highlighted AI's impact on education, like can be seen in pockets with various levels of integration across different regions. And the key challenge, like you said, would be finding the time to build the educators' confidence in using AI effectively. And while AI is already evolving in different workspaces to create supportive tools, especially like for accessibility and for assessment, it'll be more education specific and help to reduce the workload as well. And the bigger conversation will focus on preparing students for future workplace demands, with AI supporting both knowledge and skill development. And ultimately, like you said, AI is a powerful catalyst for transforming education and transforming both students and teachers' lives in a positive way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the one thing that I don't want us to skip over in me answering in a positive way is part of that stop, pause, and reflect on our offer is also to not forget the risks that AI pose in terms of, in some cases, providing a solution for children that prevents them having to think critically themselves, from making sure that we are clear about equity, accessibility, that we are clear about bias and the information we share. One of the things that's often raised, and it very much affects internationally, I was asked to speak at a conference a few weeks ago, the Learn conference in Riyadh. And one of the conversations there was their learners obviously are starting to look at AI tools. 8%, I believe, was the figure of people around the world speak Arabic, but only 4% of the internet is in Arabic, which means that the data that's sitting within our AI platforms is really quite limited. So if we want to have an equitable system around the world, we need to make sure that what we're actually capturing and recording in our most powerful solutions that are accessible to learners actually represent culturally and in language and in information fair representation of cultures all around the world, in the same way as we want to make sure that there is gender parity in much of the information that's captured when we look at historical information, which conveniently, as I'm sure you'll know, was very biased towards one gender over the other when it comes to recording historical facts.
Mm-hmm. True. Thank you so much. Absolutely. So, my next question for you is, what advice would you give to the aspiring entrepreneurs looking to create impactful solutions in the education space?
It's really difficult because there is an element of, if you're passionate about something and you believe in something, you have to follow that journey. The advice I always try and give when particularly startups reach out looking for a bit of time and a few insights is to remind them that number one, co-production is king. Don't try and create a solution and then find a problem in education that you can try and present it will fix. You have to understand the education. You have to understand what the current challenges are, and then produce a solution that is appropriate to meet that need. And often, I think a few years ago, I remember Google introducing Google Glasses, and they tried to present it as being really helpful in schools because senior leaders could watch through the camera on teachers' glasses as part of their professional development and as part of their review. Now, no teacher is going to want to be in a classroom knowing somebody's looking through their glasses and monitoring how good their teaching craft is. But that was a classic example of trying to find a problem to fit your product. So co-production is key. The other thing we saw, and I think the pandemic was a good accelerator, is something that a gentleman, Christian Claytonson, has written. Clayton Christensen, I do apologize, has written a number of books around, which is around digital disruption and development. And what we've tended to find is we start a new product with that often referred to American term MVP, minimum viable product. And each year you add things to your product. One part is because customers ask for it. One part is because competitors have done something similar. And maybe one part, hopefully, is you've come up with some fresh ideas. Well, year after year after year, your product becomes far more than the customer actually needs. And you have to be bold enough to take that digital disruption and reset a product back down to what is actually needed in schools. Because what we've seen is it always, for many years at least, was a measure was, I have two solutions I can buy to meet this problem in my school. This one's got 10 features. This one's got 2 features. I'm going to get this one because there's more features and value. But actually, we've learned that the most important things are ease of use, being platform agnostic, because we might change the devices we use across our schools or in parts of our schools, being secure from a data protection, data privacy perspective, and being something that's flexible and scalable, because we don't know how many schools might join what we're doing or stretch and so on. And so for the right reasons, we're now very much focused on keep it simple. The easy tools are the ones that teachers and students can build the confidence and skills in quickly, and that actually it's not a race to see who's got the most buttons and features on the toolbar. And that's been a really important reset for EdTech companies. Don't try and guess what people need. Co-produce and learn from the actual customers. And I hope one that you'll support as well, that happens at many conferences, is don't forget student voice. If you're creating a solution for a classroom, don't just ask the teachers.
Absolutely. I think, like you said, creating impactful solutions in education requires a clear vision, adaptability, and a strong focus on solving the real problem. So I think it's about staying passionate, prioritizing co-production, embracing digital transformation, and always keeping it simple for lasting success. And of course, student voice matters. So you need to know your target audience, that if you're creating something for the students, then you need to know their perspective. It is not just about the teachers, it has to be for both of the people or for the audience who is going to be directly affected by what you create.
Absolutely.
Right. So here's a fun question for you. Which is your favorite holiday destination?
Oh, my goodness. Now, that's quite a different topic from the one we've been talking about.
Yep.
I'm going to confess that in recent years, holiday has not been something on my radar, because I'm very lucky that I really enjoy what I do, so I rarely take any time. But if I was going to mention a holiday destination that was my favorite place, I would probably say it was either the Cayman Islands, which sounds really grand, just in the Caribbean. But when my wife and my two young children, when we decided to come back from America, from living in Atlanta, it was a really close, cheap flight to the Cayman Islands when we went there before we came back to the UK. So it's a favorite one, only been once, but it was kind of the next stepping stone in our family, and we're moving to the UK. And then the other one is I've always been a fan, and when we were younger with our children, all sorts of different Greek islands, Corfu, Kos, Zakynthos. We've always had happy memories of the children when they were young in the Greek islands. So that would be my two that I can think of.
Amazing. That's really nice. Reminds me of, it's a place called Manali. It's in the heart of the hills in North India. So whenever I feel like, I want to relax myself, my exams are over and I have some time to get back to study. So me and my family, we go there. I think I always feel like I'm very attached to the hills, especially I'm a nature lover. So I love to visit the hills, relax, and I get the energy back, and I can, start my work all over again with new energy and newfound motivation.
Love that. Perfect one.
Thank you. Right. So we have a lot of comments coming in the chat today. So there is Mr. Pravleen joining us. Thank you so much. There is Mr. Sean McLaughlin. All shouts to you both and your many hats.
I'll wait with the right hand there.
Shining faces equals enlightened learning.
Oh, that's a lovely quote. Like that one.
Hi both. I'll write about this being a top podcast, as usual, listening from public transport. Thank you. What a top-notch recruitment idea, such a visionary one. It's a everyday learning with introduction of a new technique every day. It is really an appreciative aspect to lead solutions to certain situations, and that too with regard to Bloom's taxonomy. Indeed. Such a realistic undertaking of covering every dimension in child development, especially the spirit of morality in the digital era. Professional development and training is a challenge, and it's added stress to many institutions. Yep, teacher peer pressure as well.
I always use the example on that one, which is a glass full of water, and that's very much how many educators are now. So before we add in more professional development, more training, We have to, as system leaders, think of tipping something out to provide that capacity, because all too easily we expect everybody to learn new digital skills from listening to great podcasts like this, YouTube and other platforms, but doing it in their evenings and weekends, which is time when we want people to have that work-life balance and spend that on non-work related things.
Absolutely. Awareness towards ethical online behavior definitely plays a pivotal role in the AI application in education sector.
Something I've talked about for many, many years is digital citizenship, which is much broader. It starts with that understanding about your digital footprint, where your data goes. It's about how you communicate in a digital world. And sadly, some people, when they communicate online, and they often use the term digital disinhibition, which means we speak in a way online that we wouldn't face to face with somebody. And then much more broadly, as we look at these tools, it's really thinking about understanding the implications and being able to check the authenticity and value of the information that you access online as well. But yeah, really good point.
Indeed, like you're able to check if you're inclusive, you're informed, engaged, balanced, alert, and finally, when you're able to do all of these things, you become an impactor. And then you spread the ripple reaction, to spread it forward to the other people around you.
Well, we always say if you have information and you apply skills, we give people agency, and that's the most important thing that we always are trying to aim towards.
Indeed. Miss Monica says that your newsletters are very informative. I'd agree.
Oh, that's very kind. Many may have come across my newsletter on LinkedIn. I try and do on a Saturday morning each week, along with my small cockapoo dog, Ferdy, who helps me in the mornings write my newsletter. The reason why I try and do that is because it just reminds us all at NAMIA how many amazing educators around the world are sharing willingly lots of great resources. So I capture lots of different articles that amazing people have written, spot some people who have done some great work, and then just try and shine a spotlight on it for everybody so they can go and discover them. And it's a real, for me, it's part of my learning journey. It forces me to read lots of things early on a Saturday morning to create my newsletter, but it means that I make time to learn every week, which is really good.
Indeed. Thank you so much. Well, I guess we're over with the comments. Right. So here's another question that I have for you. How can the education sector promote greater inclusivity and ensure that EdTech solutions effectively cater to the diverse needs of learners, as you were just talking about accessibility before this?
That's a great question, because it's very easy to think that if we create more technology, it will somehow make things fairer and more equitable for learners. But actually, we start from a global perspective, which is if we're introducing technology that our learners are going to use both in school and outside of school, we have to have equity of connectivity. We have to make sure there isn't a digital divide for our learners. We then have to, back to that point about using tools that are platform agnostic, understand that if all that we offer is digital, then some of our children go home and don't have the same access to a digital device as others. So we have to think about the digital equity, the flexibility of the tools. Then we come on to the element, which is what are we trying to achieve? And that very often is less is more. Whilst there are some amazing tools that can support our learners who have special educational needs, the aim has always got to be that all children in the classroom use the same tools. Nobody wants to have some children using one tool and some children using another, unless it's appropriate. So I think what we look at is say, well, actually, technology gives us the option to make the interface of our products adaptable, make sure that they're accessible for learners depending on different accessibility guidance, making sure we develop interfaces where the text on the interface can be captured by a screen reader so it can be read out as an audio version if needed, looking at the way we do a classroom instruction product and we create a learning journal so that all the resources a teacher shares, if a child is off sick or isn't able to access it at the time, there's a history of all the resources and what was shared during the lesson, so there's an opportunity to catch up. But I think most importantly, it comes back to that co-production. How are we measuring the success of our product, and are we fixing it for one strand of learners, or are we fixing for a broader? Now, there's a point on this one, which is something that I'm quite passionate about. I've just completed writing my latest book, which is perhaps not surprisingly after our conversation, about the awkward questions in education, the current challenges and problems that we have. And our education system around the world for many, many years has focused pretty much the same, which is this idea that the most intellectually capable child will be the most successful. They will achieve the highest scores and then they will go to university and so on. And for the first time, we're actually recognizing that's not necessarily the case. I discovered when I was doing my research a Chinese proverb that I loved, which is a stumbling bird can reach the forest first, which is the idea that in many Western countries, we think the smartest child will achieve the most. And in many Eastern countries, we think actually it's about how hard you work, how much effort you put in, how much you practice will be what allows you to achieve sometimes more. And if we think about the way that AI and the tools available to us are replacing the need for us to always learn all of the facts that we traditionally learn at school, but amplifies the need for us to ask the right questions, to challenge the authenticity, to innovate, to create. Actually, as an employer, I'm not always looking for the person with the most qualifications. I'm looking for the person that's got the most flexible and resilient human skills to complement the technology I use in my workplace. And so I think as we evolve technology, it's a little bit like going to the fairgrounds and trying to shoot the ducks that are going along on the fairground ride ahead of you. You've got to aim ahead. We can't develop technology today in our technology companies for the classroom of today. We have to be looking at what the classroom of 5 years from now needs and be developing with a mindset for how that will adapt based on society. And so the most important thing is actually some of our most neurodiverse students have got some real power skills that will play amazingly well in a more digital adopted world. And so we have to amplify those most human skills. I love it. It's a thing that's got me really passionate because for the first time, I kind of feel we've leveled the playing field for all learners. There's a pathway for the most academic and the most able, but we're starting to recognize there's pathways where success is a very different measure on different topics, but they all have the same value when it comes to what we can deliver in the workplace. I think that's my way, albeit going slightly off track on that one, is to say that the priority for new EdTech products is to build tools that are useful and purposeful for the full cohort of learners and to make sure that they're co-produced with them.
Indeed, I think flexibility is the key, and it doesn't matter, how many marks that you get. It's about how you implement that in the future. And I really like that quote that you said that, it's about how you're able to implement whatever you're learning in the future. And it's not about how many qualifications that you have. It's about how you adapt yourself in an environment, and you're keen to learn new things. You're keen to, accept wherever you can improve, and how you can change things according to what is required. And when it's talking about, promoting inclusivity in education, it requires not only access to technology, but also focus on digital equity, ensuring that these flexible tools that people create cater to diverse learner needs, and it's continuously measuring success and to make necessary improvements wherever required. And of course, prioritizing co-production is the key.
You captured those all perfectly. And of course, the other great example, if we want to talk about effort and going the extra distance, a good example is the person that I'm talking to today, whether it's from a Minecraft ambassador to 96 episodes of a podcast. There's lots of different ways to acquire knowledge and experience and ideas that are there based on if you put the effort and the work in, that you can acquire really valuable skills and experiences. So I think you're a great example of that question.
Thank you so much. That means a lot. Thank you. Right. So before we end today's amazing discussion, we would love to know where we can find you online and what message would you like to give to the audience listening to us right now?
Well, the easy bit, I suppose, is where can you find me online? With my Al talking about all different things, alkingsley.com, nice and easy. And on most social media sites, you'll find me on LinkedIn, Al Kingsley, on X, alkingsley_edu. And wearing my grown-up work hat, you can find me at netsupportsoftware.com. In terms of advice to give to people, I think the most important thing, particularly for young listeners, when we're thinking about education, is to remind everybody that the world is changing, and it isn't the same in the sense that it doesn't matter if you're academic or not. If you put the work in, if you look at the changing landscape of jobs, the opportunities will come. My bigger message is to those who are focused in education is a reminder that we need to revise our curriculum. We need to start thinking about micro-credentials, different ways of learning, trusting the continued assessment that we see within our schools, rather than those high-stake exams at the end that make that final decision on a student's next step in their journey. But the most important one is keep sharing. We have an amazing education community around the world. Keep talking, keep sharing. And maybe one day the people that really matter will listen. But in the meantime, we can support each other, whether that's morally giving people empathy and support, or whether it's sharing great resources that we've seen from around the world. I think you're on mute for this last bit.
Thank you for telling me that. And
Right.
of course, like that's how we, share, learn, and grow together. And listening to you has reminded me of the fact that, in the involving word of education, success lies in embracing AI to reduce workload, fostering inclusivity through flexible tools, and nurturing skills that technology can't replace, where we're ensuring a balanced, human centered approach to learning and always being more adaptive, being more flexible at the same time.
I love that. And I see from the comments, you are now officially Namia the Great.
Thank you so much, Mr. Praveen, for that lovely comment. And yep, share, learn, and grow together. Hashtag each one teach 10. And on that note, thank you so much, Al, for giving your amazing time on the podcast today. It was absolutely inspiring to listen to your thoughts. And I'm sure I've learned a lot, and the audience, of course, has too as well.
It's my pleasure. And more importantly, keep being amazing. Keep doing what you're doing. And good luck on your 100th episode coming up soon.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining and listening to this episode. And I'll see you in the next one. Till then, each one, each 10. Have a nice day.